Laurel fastened the collar of her patched-up exosuit and stepped into the crisp twilight air. The entire colony lay stretched out before her, domes once gleaming under a vibrant sky, now dulled by the looming threat no one could quite believe. The atmosphere's slow disappearance. It was subtle at first. Readings had skewed downward, oxygen saturation decreasing fraction by fraction. But after 6 months without improvement, everyone knew the truth. Every living thing on this terraformed moon was in danger, and time was slipping away. They had come to this moon in search of better lives. The promise was a new Eden, a place to build rivers and forests from scratch under an alien sun. Generations of scientists had toiled to transform the once barren wasteland into something habitable. It was never perfect, an oxygen-rich bubble that required careful monitoring and frequent maintenance. But the colony had persevered, constructing outposts, farmland, and a modest capital city known as Dawnspire. Yet now, Dawnspire's shining towers looked weary and scuffed. Airlocks that once operated smoothly required persistent repairs. The once faithful isles of farmland, which had provided an abundance of produce, showed signs of stress. Leaves dried out more quickly, harvest yields had dropped. The only place that still displayed some optimism was the Terraform Project laboratory, where top scientists struggled to understand the crisis. Laurel, a skilled technician who once dreamed of exploring the oceans of the neighboring planet, had found a new calling there. She worked tirelessly to gather data from the environment, calibrate sensors, and verify that the atmospheric stabilizers were still functioning, if only just barely. Inside the lab's main chamber, Laurel removed her exosuit helmet and hung it on a rack. Around her, monitors displayed flickering images of the colony's vulnerable infrastructure. A cluster of worn science officers hunched over screens, analyzing every scrap of data. The hum of equipment never stopped. Instead, it filled her ears and mind with a constant reminder of the Herculean task they faced. "Any changes?" she asked, her voice more subdued than she intended. The question was directed to Donovan, the head atmospheric engineer, who stood behind a lab bench covered in instruments. Donovan shook his head. The oxygen ratio dipped 2 more points since daybreak. Our workaround to seal the northern cracks in the outer barrier didn't take. We have new ruptures opening up in regions once thought stable, and that's just from the last hour's readings. Blair felt her heart sink. Anything else? Are the stabilizers giving us trouble? No direct malfunctions, Donovan sighed, flipping through a digital report, or carrying out their tasks. But something bigger is at play. We're losing our atmosphere faster than the stabilizers can compensate. A wave of frustration washed over her, the numb anger of helplessness. No matter how meticulously they tweaked the system, or how many new protocols they tried, their measured efforts seemed like a drop in a cosmic bucket. "Where's Dr. Soren?" Laurel asked, removing her gloves. "We need to figure out if we overlooked a factor in the Terraform project's original design." Donovan nodded toward a side corridor. "He's in the archives with Zahir, probably combing through old logs trying to find a clue." Laurel made her way through the labyrinthine corridors. Metal plates underfoot echoed her footsteps, each clang resonating with a grim undertone that made the environment feel more claustrophobic. The Terraform Project archives were surprisingly small. It was a cramped, windowless space jammed with data consoles, battered filing cabinets, and dusty catalogs from the earliest phases of colonization. She found Dr. Soren half buried behind a battered data console. A flicker of overhead light illuminated the deep lines on his face, a testament to the anxieties plaguing him and the entire colony. Zahir sat at another console, tapping through lines of ancient scientific notes. "Donovan said you've got something," Laurel said. She paused, noticing the tension in Dr. Soren's posture. "Is it a lead?" Soren frowned. "Possibly. We've found references to an advanced substrate that sits deep beneath the moon's surface, something akin to a series of underground channels. The original Terraform project designers believed that, when heated properly, these channels would release gases, sustaining the atmosphere above. But there are references to certain reactors that never got built." Laurel's eyes widened. "We jumped to colonization too soon, didn't we? The protocols to fully activate those subsurface channels were never completed." That's the working theory, Zahir added. We think these subterranean lava tubes might hold reserves of sulfates and nitrates, essential for continuous atmospheric renewal. But implementing the design requires specialized drilling equipment and large-scale reactors. We only have partial facilities. The original plan from Earth's labs was postponed due to funding shortages and scheduling demands. Dr. Soren's voice quivered in frustration, and it never caught up with us because for a time the environment was stable. But now, centuries after the first wave of terraforming, the missing pieces have come back to haunt us. A heavy silence settled in the archives, punctuated by the dull hum of the overhead lights. Laurel began to piece together the puzzle. The neglected system beneath their feet could be the only solution to saving a broken atmosphere. After pacing for a moment, she said, "We need to propose immediate action. Talk to the council, request permission to mobilize a team, gather resources, whatever it takes to build these reactors. We can't afford to wait." Soren logged out of the console. Agreed. Let's bring this to Counselor Isabeth and see if she'll grant a meeting. Time is against us. Every day the oxygen levels drop further. They headed out of the archives, weaving through the labyrinth. Laurel couldn't help but notice how few people roamed the corridors. The usual hustle and bustle had disappeared, replaced by stifled anxiety. Many colonists remained indoors, rationing energy, operating minimal machinery. The communal spirit the colony once prided itself on felt fractured, like a reflection in broken glass. At the council chamber, they were met by Lisbeth's assistant, who wore an expression of thinly veiled concern. "Counselor Isabeth is finishing an emergency call with the governor of Farpoint Settlement. She'll see you in a few minutes." Laurel took a seat in the austere waiting area where the walls were a pale green meant to convey calm. She glanced at Dr. Soren, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He'd been working day and night to crack the code of this disappearing atmosphere, and now it seemed they had a vital clue. The real question was whether the council had the political will and resources to act. Soon the assistant ushered them into a circular chamber dominated by a central dais. Counselor Isabeth, dressed in a crisp uniform, looked up from a clutter of datapads. The stress etched into her lined forehead was unmistakable. "We appreciate your time, Counselor," Dr. Soren began. "Our recent findings indicate an essential component of the Terraform project was never fully activated. Subterranean channels beneath this moon contain vital elements that, if properly harnessed, will help restore our atmosphere's stability." Isabeth glanced at Laurel, silently asking for more details. Laurel stepped forward. "We need large-scale drilling to reach these channels and specialized reactors that have never been built. But if we succeed, it might be enough to save the colony. The existing atmospheric stabilizers just can't handle it alone." Before Isabeth could reply, a second council member, Holt, entered the chamber. He was the type to weigh every decision according to its cost and political viability. "Massive drilling? Building new reactors?" he said, smoothing the lapel of his coat. "Even if that works, do you have any idea how many resources that would require? Our supply lines are already stretched. The agricultural failures alone demand immediate attention." Laurel felt frustration churn inside her. "Then it's time to make difficult choices. If we don't fix what's happening, agriculture won't matter. We won't have breathable air to keep our plants or ourselves alive." Isbeth held up her hand, signaling for calm. "I don't dispute the urgency, but implementing such a drastic measure requires full council approval. We'll convene an emergency session with the other council members tonight. In the meantime," she turned to Dr. Soren, "prepare clear evidence, cost estimates, supply needs, personnel rosters, bare bones, no extras. We need to convince the council that there's no alternative." "Understood," Dr. Soren said gravely. "We'll do our best." That evening, Laura joined Soren, Zahir, and Donovan in the lab. They huddled over data displays, working through possible configurations for the drilling rigs and reactors. One by one, they hammered out details. The steel requirements, the specialized machinery, the energy drones that would push molten material down the channels to release the trapped gases. A few hours later, the analysis was complete. Dr. Soren's eyes gleamed with cautious hope. If we can mobilize half the colony's technical staff to build and operate these rigs, we might have functioning reactors in 3 months. That's our best guess. But we'll likely see partial results before then if the activation of the channels goes smoothly. Laurel glanced at the oxygen monitor on the wall. 3 months is cutting it close. We have daily atmospheric losses, not weekly or monthly, but if it's the only plan, we have to try. Zahir nodded solemnly, uploading their final proposal onto a crystal drive. Let's hope reason prevails in the council. The colony's survival depends on it. That night, Laurel managed only a few hours of restless sleep. She dreamed of a cosmic wind stripping away the skies, leaving everyone gasping in the vacuum. She awoke with a start, chest tight, heart pounding in the dim glow of her living quarters. Outside her small window, the stars twinkled unnaturally bright through a thinning atmosphere. She took a moment to compose herself, then redressed and hurried to the council chamber for the emergency session. Councillor Elizabeth stood at the center of the dais, addressing the assembled dozen council members. Laurel, Donovan, Dr. Soren, and Zahir waited on one side of the chamber. We're teetering on the brink, Elizabeth said gravely. We've heard the warnings from our scientists. The Terraform project has a critical flaw. The plan they've presented is risky. There's no denying that. It will take nearly all our reserves to build the infrastructure, and it will demand every ounce of skill and discipline from our technicians. Grumbles sounded from a few corners of the chamber. Holt crossed his arms. So, we suspend all new expansions, reduce farmland upgrades, curtail power usage everywhere else? Does that not open us to famine and unrest? What good is farmland if we have no air? Zahir interjected. He glanced around at the skeptical faces. I say this not to provoke, but to emphasize the stark reality we face. A hush descended. The council members exchanged glances, each grappling with a mixture of fear and pragmatism. Slowly, Councillor Elizabeth extended a hand toward Dr. Soren. Time for your technical briefing, she said softly. Dr. Soren took a breath and launched into the details, explaining the interplay of underground chemical processes, the importance of the reactors to stimulate these processes, and the challenges in establishing a stable, self-replenishing atmosphere. Laurel listened, studying the council members' expressions. Some took notes. Others stared or frowned. She channeled all her hope into Soren's words, praying that logic and reason would triumph. When Soren finished, the council withdrew to deliberate in private. The wait felt interminable. Laurel paced the antechamber, her nerves frayed. Donovan tried to lighten the mood with stories of how he first joined the Terraform engineering team, but no one could focus. Finally, the council reassembled and delivered its verdict. Councillor Elizabeth stood, addressing the entire gallery. We approve the proposal to build the subterranean reactors and undertake the required drilling. Effective immediately, all non-essential development is on hold. We understand these measures will bring hardship, but we see no alternative if the colony is to survive. May fortune favor us in the days ahead. Relief spread through Laurel's chest, and she exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for weeks. Work began at first light the next day. The colony's construction teams were mobilized with unprecedented speed. Even in the dire circumstances, there was a sense of renewed purpose. Laurel and Donovan split into teams to oversee different sites. From the top of the hills near Dawnspire to the remote outskirts near the dormant lava fields, huge drilling towers were erected. Under Donovan's watchful eye, the old supply depots were emptied of steel, copper, and crucial parts for the reactors. The gloom that hung over the colony lifted a little as colonists found direction in their new assignments. Many who had lost hope felt a spark of pride they were working to save their home. But it was exhausting, grueling work. The suits they wore weighed heavily on them when they ventured outside the domes. Dust storms kicked up by the drilling sometimes scoured entire sections of the colony. Hours dragged on. Meeting turned into meeting, and the nights were short. After a week, the first few drill bits breached the subsurface channels. Laurel had the honor of descending with a small crew into the newly opened caverns. What they found was both eerie and awe-inspiring. massive hollow tubes of mineral-laced stone that glowed faintly under the workers' luminescent beams. The rock formations shimmered in unexpected colors: rust red, deep gold, luminous pearl. Traces of ancient water flows marked the walls, leaving behind ribbons of sediment that told stories of a long-lost era before the Terraform project. The air down here was stale, but heavier than above, as though the planet itself had been hoarding remnants of its own atmosphere over millennia. "This is incredible," Laurel breathed into her headset. "Let's start mapping the channels for reactor placement." Her team fanned out, scanning the walls and feeding data to the surface. Every reading they obtained corroborated Dr. Soren's theories. These tubes were rich in key compounds required for atmospheric regeneration. The only question was whether they could harness it fast enough. Back on the surface, Donovan supervised the assembly of the first test reactor. It was an ungainly construction of steel plating, high-temperature coils, and chemical injectors. When the time came to activate it, they did so under a protective dome to mitigate any catastrophic failure. Some colonists stood on the periphery, eyes anxious, ready to leap behind shelter if anything went wrong. A hush fell over the crowd when Donovan signaled the power-up. With a low groan, the reactor's coils glowed orange, heating to the specified temperature. There was a tense moment as sensors recorded small tremors in the cavern beneath them. Then all at once, steam and hot gusts burst from the peripheral vents. The swirling cloud, tinted with a faint green glow, rose into the sky. Laurel, who had emerged from the caverns just in time to watch, felt a tremor of elation. The instrument showed a small but measurable drop in subterranean pressure and a corresponding slight uptick in atmospheric composition. It was the first tangible proof they were on the right track. Days blurred into weeks as more reactors came online. Each new tower drilled deeper and tapped further channels, releasing more stored chemicals into the atmosphere. Colonists began to remark on the changing sky, which gradually took on a richer hue of blue. Hope spread like wildfire, mingled with the sweat and tears of the laborers. Although the progress was minuscule compared to the scale of the threat, it was still real. Despite all this, the atmosphere still thinned faster than they hoped. Dr. Soren and Zahir spent countless hours recalibrating reactor settings, trying to maximize gas release without causing structural collapses below. Rumors spread that a partial cave-in had killed a drilling team in the western quadrant. Tempers flared among workers demanding safer conditions. The council scrambled to maintain morale. One day, while inspecting Reactor 9, Laurel picked up disturbing readings. The ground tremors had grown stronger. Stability in that region was questionable at best. Grabbing a handheld sensor, she noted abnormally high seismic activity. "Donovan," she said over the radio, "I'm seeing major quakes building. Increase safety protocols on the southwestern site immediately." Moments later, an urgent voice cut in. "Reactor 9 is nearing meltdown. The coolant system's malfunctioning. We need immediate help." Laurel's pulse thundered in her ears. She sprinted across the drilling site, dust swirling around her boots. On arrival, she found a scene of chaos. Technicians crowded near the reactor's control panels, alarm lights flashing red. The hum of an overstrained reactor hammered at her senses. "Shut it down," Donovan yelled, but the meltdown alarm shrieked. Heated steam vented from cracks in the pipe assemblies, scalding the air. Laurel rushed to the control board and quickly assessed the meltdown's cause. A jammed coolant valve. With her wrench in hand, she forced the valve open. Steam hissed and scalded her protective gloves, but coolant finally surged back into the overheated core. Donovan hammered at the manual override, forcing the reactor into a partial shutdown. Minutes stretched painfully until the alarms died down. Soot-covered and drenched in sweat, Laurel stumbled away from the control panel, exhaling in ragged relief. "You saved Reactor 9, Donovan panted. "If we'd lost it, the entire southwestern site might have collapsed." She nodded wordlessly, feeling the raw ache of adrenaline subside. They'd come far, but the project was fragile, balancing on a knife's edge. In the following week, tensions among colonists reached a breaking point. A small faction claimed the subterranean drilling would doom the colony, either through unleashing unknown toxins or triggering unstoppable earthquakes. Protests erupted outside the council chamber. Councillor Holt tried to exploit the unrest, proposing that they halt further expansion until they could evaluate the operation's safety. But such delays would mean certain death for the atmosphere. Counselor Islabat and Dr. Soren stood firm. They had to keep pushing ahead, refining safety but not stopping. The push to complete the reactors climaxed on the eve of a planetary alignment, when the gravitational pull from the nearby gas giant heightened tidal forces here on the moon. That night, reactor after reactor fired up in sequence. Streams of newly liberated gases hissed skyward, merging with the existing atmosphere in what looked like flickers of emerald lights. An otherworldly glow bathed Dawnspire. Laurel, Donovan, Dr. Soren, and Zahir gathered atop a platform to witness this final synchronized activation. Beyond them, dozens of colonists from every walk of life crowded around in hushed awe. After midnight, the last reactor spun up, releasing a massive gust of warm, shimmering vapor that made the sky shimmer with faint ribbons of green and turquoise. A hush descended. Laurel checked her portable monitor. "The oxygen levels are rising," she murmured. The crowd exploded in cheers. People hugged, some wept openly, and a collective sigh of relief seemed to uplift the entire colony. Days later, satellite data confirmed a steady and significant increase in the moon's atmospheric integrity. The Terraform project, once on the brink of utter failure, had a new lease on life. In the aftermath, life did not return to effortless normalcy. The colony had exhausted many supplies, and the environment needed continued maintenance. But they had arrested the atmosphere's disintegration and, in so doing, reclaimed a future. Fields that had been withering began to show signs of recovery, leaves turning emerald green in the brightening sunlight. Children ventured outside with simpler masks, no longer trapped in sealed environments all day. At night, the horizon glowed in delicate shades of pale green where the advanced terraformed reactors still churned away. Laurel stood on a high ridge overlooking Dawnspire, marveling at how the skycon's pale and fading on again blazed a deep, comforting blue. She remembered the day she arrived on this moon, eyes brimming with youthful optimism. Although that optimism had been tested almost to the breaking point, she felt a renewed sense of hope. It was a hope etched not from naive fantasies, but from struggle and triumph, and the humbling realization that survival demands constant vigilance. Donovan approached, exosuit helmet under one arm. "Quite the sight, isn't it?" She nodded, letting the steady breeze ruffle her hair. "We did it. We saved the Terraform project, and it only took everything we had." He gave a small laugh. It's an odd feeling, standing at the edge of an almost disaster and then stepping back into the realm of possibility. But our job isn't over. We have to keep monitoring these reactors, watch for seismic shifts. You know how precarious it still is. Of course. She turned to face him. But for the first time in months, it feels like we actually have a tomorrow waiting for us. A real one. Dr. Soren arrived on the ridge, his pace slow but dignified as he gazed at the swirling colors near the horizon. "The Council will be sending more research teams to expand our knowledge. There's still so much we don't know about this moon's geology, but at least we won't be blindsided again." Laurel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were the spark behind finding the missing piece in the Terraform project. Thank you for not giving up." His eyes glimmered with pride and relief. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. This success belongs to everyone who labored round the clock, who risked their lives. We might have arrived on this moon with a sense of entitlement, as if we could shape it to our liking. But ultimately, it's been a partnership. We had to learn how to listen to the planet itself." Leaning against the ridge railing, Laurel closed her eyes briefly. In the distance, the twilight sky began its nightly transition, stars winking into life. She felt them differently now, no longer as a threat, reminding her of a thin, fragile barrier between life and cosmic vacuum, but as points of light shining on a new era for the colony. Behind her, the uncertain whispers of fear were giving way to the murmur of renewed hope. A sense of community was being rebuilt. With the atmosphere stabilizing, trades, agriculture, schooling, life itself could begin to flourish once again, and though the sky had nearly faded on them, it was strengthening each day, anchored by the grit and tenacity of those who refused to let it vanish. Laurel inhaled deeply, savoring the cool air that no longer tasted of metal filters and stale containment. Above her, subtle, luminescent streaks from the reactor emissions blended seamlessly with the natural starlight. She felt the planet breathe with her. Soon, the sounds of celebration from Dawnspire would echo through the night. But for now, standing in that tranquil spot on the ridge, she cherished a single moment of serenity. The crisis had driven them to desperation, yet it had also bound them together in a testament to resolve and ingenuity. When she opened her eyes again, she found Dr. Soren and Donovan gazing at her with small smiles, as if urging her to speak. But she found no grand lecture or stirring speech. Instead, she said the plain truth that burned in her heart. We survived, and tomorrow we begin to truly live here. It was a simple declaration, yet loaded with all the promise and hardship of what lay ahead. There were still endless challenges, more reactor expansions, potential aftershocks, resource rationing. But that was life in a colonized world. You build, you learn, and you adapt. And, she reflected, you never stop looking up at the sky in wonder.